Hello and welcome to Life's Booming Series 5 of this most excellent and award-winning podcast. I'm James Valentine, and in this series we're going to ask the question, is this normal? I mean, as we age, stuff happens to us. Our bodies change, things fall off, we get crook, stuff doesn't work as well as it used to. There's nothing we can do about it. We're getting older, we're aging. But which bits are normal? Which bits do we have no control over? Which bits can we do something about? That's the kind of questions that we're going to be asking in this series, Is This Normal?, of Life's Booming. Now, of course, if you enjoy this series, leave us a review, tell all your families and friends about it. And we want to hear from you as well. You can contribute to this. If you've got questions about things in particular that you want to know, perhaps there's some particular wear and tear happening to you, let us know. We'd love to see if we can answer that question in the series. We're going to look at things like menopause, gut health, mental health, lots of other burning questions. So think about those areas, and if there's something in there that's specific to you that you'd like us to cover, let us know. On this episode, we'll delve into another aspect of our health that is perhaps less spoken about, zeroing in on mental health. We'll be speaking to clinical psychologist Dr Charlotte Keating, who is currently practicing in Sydney. But first, let's introduce someone you might know as Effie, comedian Mary Coustas. Well, hello.
Hello.
So we're going to talk some mental health. We're going to talk about these kind of things, what affects you as you get older, how you deal with it as you get older, what changes. What have you noticed, Mary?
Here's the thing. I love contrast. I love contradiction. I like all those things that when put together, make for a more interesting mix. You feel more yourself, obviously, with age. You've worked through what matters and what doesn't, and hopefully you've found a healthy place to put what you've learnt, either in practice or out there into the world, and I do it through laughter mostly. But your body goes through something else that you should have anticipated, but you didn't.
Yeah.
So I've found the whole menopause thing really tricky, particularly for me, because when I was going through perimenopause, I was doing 10 years of IVF.
Right.
So it was hard for me to know that I was going through perimenopause because I was taking IVF drugs to have my now daughter. So then I missed that. And then I was a much later, I came to motherhood late. And so then after I gave birth to my daughter, I was going through menopause. But you think because women are so accustomed to discomfort, and I'm not talking about marriage, although sometimes it's that, that we don't connect the dots enough. So I thought it must be because I've just become a mother and the hormones from that, and I didn't realise that it was the menopause thing. And the menopause thing plagues us in many different ways, but mentally it's a big one. Yeah. It was the biggest one for me.
Before that, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche to say that the comedians are often doing that because of anxiety, because of various mental health issues. Were you that? Is Effie the outcome of anything
No,
like that?
I mean, yes, I had anxiety. I had a dying father. That doesn't help. Like he was unwell from before I was born. So that was the only true anxiety apart from the racism that I encountered and then turned into a career.
Yeah, you mentioned that Effie's a response to racism. I suppose I hadn't quite realised that. Explain how that came about.
Well, I was very confident growing up in a working class multicultural suburb, and then we moved as a family. My dad was very much a bigger picture sort of guy and said we need to go where you can get a better education. And unfortunately, that was in a very white area, and I was the little seed from the multi-grain that made it into a very white area, and I was spotted immediately. Right. Everything about me. I was very into fashion. I had my Susie Quattro haircut. I was on it. Yeah. And I paid a terrible price for that. Right. For being different. I was 9. Right. And it sort of peaked, I think, a year or two in, and I just couldn't find a way to make it work for me. I was ostracized and it was tough. It was very, very tough because it was coinciding with my dad's health, and it was a very defining moment for me. And I hated the suburbs. I still get a little bit, oh God, I've got to get back to, the inner, because that's where I feel like that's where we celebrate togetherness a bit more. You know, we don't drive up a driveway and close the garage door and say goodbye to the day and everyone around us. And that I don't like that isolated feeling. So the minute I stood on stage during my high school years in musicals, which is ridiculous, I don't sing at all, but I mime brilliantly. I just went, okay, this is my stage and this is where I can, you know, express myself. And this, you know, the Greeks built this thing.
Right. Yeah,
you know, thousands of years ago, and they knew something, and it's my thing. And because I love the older generation so much and their stories, and this is, you know, beautifully folding into the conversation that we're having, I was never bored with that generation and what they'd experienced and their village stories and how they came to Australia and what that was like for them. And so the marriage of that obsession with the older generation with finding a healthy outlet to express which the big noose that was hanging around my social neck, which was race. Wogs Out of Work happened. I served Nick Giannopoulos as a waitress. He just graduated from acting school, and so had I. I didn't know him. But then he told me. We went to the same primary school, the same Greek school. I mean, it was just
Amazing.
so bizarre. And then Wogs Out of Work happened, and that was the thing that changed the conversation in Australia. It was such a humongous stage show that really addressed, you know, the elephant in the cultural room, and then discovered that the elephant was the best thing ever. And there were lots of elephants, and there were giraffes and big lions, and so I think the world has changed. Well, certainly mine has, and I think there are a lot of people out there that are now super confident. And Effie was the perfect way to illustrate a young girl. Like so many Greeks, on paper, Effie would appear as failed, I would imagine. You know, her English isn't great. She's working class. She's primarily uneducated. She left at year 10, went and studied hairdressing. Walks into any room, whether it's with the Prime Minister in the room, which I've done a lot of that high-end corporate stuff. Any room, any place feels worthy, feels relevant, and still 35 years in is that, you know, example of someone that is because of self-love. It's funny because my current stage show is called Up Yourselfness. And Effie in that says it's the only immunity we have left is to love who we are. And you know, in the show prior to this one is about political correctness and language. And as I said, Effie's never been great with language, but she's been great with feelings and demystifying things. The show before this one, Effie talked about, you know, lockdowns and COVID, and she admitted to her own mental health issues. So I think she's a great mouthpiece for me to express so much of what I want to say about the world. She comes in a very animated form, and I think people believe everything she says because it is based in truth, my truth, and then I wrap it up in her little buffy exterior and accent and put it out into the world, and so that she was born out of necessity and out of my truth. But yeah, I'm a very hyper sort of person, never been diagnosed with anything other than plenty of energy. And if I look at my mother, who's 85, she's got plenty of it too. So I've used energy, and we were talking about this before we started, about how it's important to put the right words with things, and then sometimes you can conveniently put a different word that makes it sound better or worse. Some people would look at, say, adrenaline and think that it was adrenaline rather than anxiety, because it is a rush, and it is something that you can put a positive spin on. I've seen a lot of people that have built, you know, great lives and careers out of using adrenaline, and then manifests later as an anxiety. So I am no expert in this. I know what I've gone through.
That's why we've got Charlotte. It's okay. Yeah.
Good. Less
you know
pressure.
what you've gone through. Yeah.
Yeah. I believe that if you're a human being, you're going to have mental health issues.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
feelers. And
Is that true, Charlotte? Is that an accurate observation? You know, we're human beings, so we're going to at some point deal with, it could be anxiety, depression, whatever the label. We're going to deal with something.
Yeah, I think it really is. It's incredibly common. You know, 1 in 6 people across their lifespan will experience some sort of mental, you know, health challenge, be it depression or anxiety. So I think, you know, most of us have either experienced it or have known someone who will or has.
Yeah.
I suppose when I say it, I mean, like, we're all going to experience grief. We're all going to experience sadness. I mean, the greatest, not the greatest hits of what we know mental health to be these days, which is, you know, a handful of really intense feelings. But I'm just talking about being human.
Yeah.
You know, talking to somebody who's going through something very difficult that you love, or seeing, you know, a stranger you don't know on the street that, you know, that evokes the empathy and all those beautiful things that reminds us of how human we are. We can't have all those feelings without suffering through plenty of them, whether they're directly ours or not.
Is it, Charlotte, that what Mary is describing is the anxiety, the depression, those kind of things, those mental health issues? Is it when those feelings are too much or become extreme, or is anxiety, depression something else?
Yeah, I think it's a really important distinction, James. You know, I think for people who are experiencing depression or anxiety, sometimes, you know, those could be emotions that go with everyday life. I think, you know, certainly for older Australians who perhaps have had less opportunity or exposure to the sorts of knowledge, awareness and information that, you know, younger Australians have today, they can often, I was, you know, thinking about what you were saying earlier in terms of your journey, they can go to the GP and perhaps present with, I have a lot of adrenaline, or, you know, I'm feeling, you know, quite sort of tired, and not necessarily link those sorts of symptoms to perhaps there is something going on physical or mental that could represent perhaps more than just feeling off. You know, I think sometimes we might feel off for a couple of weeks and we might just sort of, you know, put it to the back of our mind and keep going. And it can be after really having let it go for some time that, in fact, if you do have a chat to your GP or you do sort of have a look, you're like, actually, I've been feeling not quite myself for more than 2 weeks. It could in fact be months, maybe even years. And, you know, whether it's low energy, low motivation, lack of enjoyment or pleasure in the things that might have typically brought it, you know, perhaps even difficulty doing the things you know you have to do, even things like self-care, memory, attention, all of those sorts of things we go, oh, you know, that's probably because I'm tired or what have you. They can be signposts that, you know, there is something going on that possibly you could get some help and support.
But I suppose for a lot of older Australians, it's also the thing to do with those things was to put it to the back of the mind, was to just go on, was to not sort of, you know, what's all this stuff about, you know, mental health? We didn't do that. We just got on with it, Charlotte. You know, it's all very well for you and your fancy diagnosis. We just got on with things.
It's absolutely true, James. And I think I was having a little look at some of the statistics on help seeking for Australians. And certainly, you know, for younger Australians, just for a, you know, point of comparison, 14% of 35 to 44-year-olds will seek help for their, you know, mental health concerns, whereas 6.8% of 65 to 74-year-olds will seek help. I was actually heartened that there was a percentage of people who would.
Doesn't sound like many, though, does it?
It doesn't.
In either group, really.
In either group, exactly, when you can consider sort of the impact it can have on, you know, daily life and functioning. But 95% of older Australians see their GP, and the GP is the sort of first port of call often for being able to help with these experiences.
Yeah. I was really struck by what you said, Mary, when you said women are used to experiencing discomfort, and so therefore perhaps tend to just roll it into, it's another one of those things that happens to me, you know, and not recognise necessarily that it could be a mental health issue.
It's funny what Charlotte said. I know a lot of older people that I'm close to that go to their GP to probably deal with more mental issues than physical ones. I mean, they're there way too regularly. And if you have a good GP that is a good listener and loves what they do and loves their patients, you know, you go there, and I think they were stoic. They had to be. These conversations weren't being had then. And I've seen, you know, so I've been inspired by that generation so much for so many reasons. Of sometimes you just have to force yourself to get on your feet and keep moving. I've experienced that personally on occasions where just too many things happened at the same time that were too heartbreaking for me to be able to, you know, pretend it didn't. There was no hiding from heartbreak and grief and trauma and all those things. But I just think that I think a lot of people are terribly lonely. And I think a lifetime can yield a lot of upset and grief and loss of potential, loss of physical capacity, loss of people you've loved, loss of opportunity, loss of, all of those things.
I wonder, Charlotte, if we're on sort of two different streams here, the difficulties of life are one thing, and the extreme difficulties that Mary's describing there of, that so many have dealt with, that she's dealt with herself, will bring rise to moments of tension, of pain, of anguish. This is different from mental health?
Oh, it's a really good question. I think what we're really sort of deciphering here is how do we respond to what life involves, what the journey involves. I think it's probably fair to say by the time people have lived multiple decades on the planet, there is a sense of stressful life events and experiences that they've all had. Some are certainly worse than others. There can be a compounding effect to some of those. I think, when we think about war, or we think about growing up in other countries and things like that, there's all sorts of cultural differences as well with how we process those experiences, and in fact grief and loss as well. And I think that can also lead to questions we ask ourselves about, well, what is normal, with respect to how we process grief? How are we supposed to do it? When is it that it might be important to perhaps seek some support in that way? You've described some stories, certainly, Mary, where I'd be interested in understanding more about your experience of grief. I think, for many people, perhaps it can be understood in the context of stages of grief. Kubler-Ross is someone that people are quite sort of familiar with in the 5 stages of grief, being sort of denial or shock, anger, then a sense of bargaining, what could have I done differently, and those sorts of things, with depression and sadness toward the end, and then, some level of acceptance of what the loss might be at the end. And those stages aren't necessarily sequential.
Yeah, or even in that order.
And I think that there isn't necessarily a timeline. Everybody's lives are so different. Their experience is so unique, together with their own sort of personality constructs and uniquenesses. And so I think, if you are listening and you're in a process of grief yourself, and you're wondering if you might be a little bit stuck in some of that processing, and as you said, Mary, it can be because sometimes there hasn't been a culture of being able to express emotionally or talk about experiences. So you might try and busy yourself or distract yourself, or, find ways to try and push it aside. But it does come out. We are biological and physical beings. It's important to be able to express it. And so, I would recommend, if there is grief you're going through that's really persistent, very painful and difficult, you're finding it hard not to excessively avoid, or perhaps, overthink the challenge at hand, and it's really impacting your capacity to sort of get on with your day-to-day, I'd recommend having a chat with your GP about it. Or if a loved one, you can see is experiencing that, try and talk with them about it.
I suppose we don't have to think of it in terms of when we go to seek help, GP, psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever it might be, we don't have to see it in terms of there must be something wrong with me.
That's it.
That I've got a mental health disease. We can go and talk for all sorts of reasons. And it might only be maybe I only need to go for half a dozen times.
Absolutely.
Maybe it's only a short period of time where you need to just be able to talk to somebody neutral, somebody who's not in the family, someone who's outside of your situation.
Look, there's a very healthy love of self when you allow yourself to express your journey and your feelings, and it's not this taboo thing that we need to dismantle that instantly.
Have you sought help?
Yeah, I have. My dad's death was a massive loss, but that was not a tragedy. And then I had a grandmother who I was lucky enough to fly to Greece. My mother's mother, and my mum and I flew there, and we were with her when she was dying, and that was an honour, and that was the perfect death. She was 93. That was all brilliant. But I lost a child, and that's a very different loss. And I was given a superstar grief counsellor who, is probably one of the most impressive humans I've ever met, and has done better work than, apart from, I don't know what else. A brain surgeon would do it with a knife.
Yeah.
She does it with, openness and no judgment. And she navigated me through, what was territory I never dared to imagine. And even beyond that, when I was then pregnant with my now daughter, I was worried that that would rob me of the joy I was finally, faced with, and so I had to go and see someone. But someone alerted me to that. My obstetrician, VJ Roach, super duper star. He's the one that got me. Deb DeWild, who was my grief counsellor, he said, I think you need to go and talk to somebody because, he knew my concerns. I'd worked so hard to finally get what I wanted, and I didn't want to be in denial of what I'd experienced prior to that. I didn't, that had happened, but I wanted to put it somewhere healthy. And I went and saw somebody, and they said, look, there's two ways you can deal with this. You can tell yourself that it's a fear fantasy and you've concocted it, but that doesn't work for you. That wasn't a fear fantasy. That was a reality you survived. So let's take that one off the table and let's just accept that you have these feelings. These feelings will come and go, and you let them pass through you. And I did the work. She gave me some exercises to do, and I've got to tell you that on the day of my daughter's birth, I went back to the same hospital where my other daughter had died, and I was literally in the same spaces with the same faces, and I did not connect the two until there was a male nurse that got put on, and he'd also lost a child, and he approached me just before I went into the theatre to deliver my daughter, and it came through another human being, and he said I needed to see the happy part of the story. He was wanting to build up his hope for what was ahead for him. So it happened in the most perfect way.
Wow.
And
that was a good moment because I can almost imagine,
moment.
why did you choose this moment to come and talk? Yeah.
No, it was a great moment. And then, we had a bit of a cry and I went in, and then I was so present to what was about to happen. And then when I was being wheeled out holding onto my daughter high as a kite, I looked at him and, we smiled. It was just beautiful. It was like something in the movies.
Yeah. Charlotte, as people age, unfortunately, these kind of moments will happen. A child can die, not necessarily in birth, but you're 20-year-old, you're 25-year-old, you're 60, 70, 80, your child can die. Your partner can die. Your friends start to die. You yourself will start to face things that are going to be extremely difficult. And again, I wonder whether we conflate these things into you'll only go and talk to a psychologist or counsellor of some sort, the priest, when it's really extreme, or if you've actually got some sort of mental health issue. Again, this is not the case, is it?
Yeah, I think it's shifting a little bit, James, but I think it has long been that challenge of, unless I'm really at breaking point, then, that's for somebody else who really needs it. That's not for me.
Had to have had a nervous breakdown.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that, as you both described, life is full of challenges and losses at various different stages, whether it's, when you're trying to start a family or as you get older and, family members might have challenges or problems going on themselves. It could even be in the context, though, of things we don't ordinarily think about, say retirement, and moving towards something that, you've derived a great deal of sense of self-worth, purpose, meaning. There's a change in one's sense of self or identity that can surround that. And even things like irritability and anxiety can, be linked to those. But, people don't necessarily know. Sometimes they do, but they don't always necessarily know. And sometimes it can be so valuable, as you said before, Mary, having a conversation with someone who really can change the trajectory of subsequent experiences you have, not even just the one that you might be seeking some sort of counsel for.
Yeah, and I also think these conversations, they don't come out, like the people that will help you get on the road to alleviating some of the discomfort of being human are not often the doctor. Someone else will tell you you will have a conversation. This is where it's important we stay close and we keep talking to each other. And I don't want this to be simply about what is difficult, because there are so many great joys, and if you can get to those highs, you're going to get to those lows, But friends or someone like in my case, where people have said, I had an issue with something like that. I spoke. You should talk to, and it just makes it feel much more natural and less tabooish if it's coming from someone who's done it themselves. And we need to keep reminding ourselves. That's why campaigns like Are You OK Day and all of those beautiful things that people have put out there, just to remind ourselves that some days are going to be better than others. And there are memories and triggers everywhere for us, especially if you've gone through difficult things that can, evoke those feelings to come back up to the surface. And, we know that community is a huge part of what makes people happy in that. Whether you're watching the Blue Zones documentary series or listening to, people from the Happiness Institute or wherever you go to find your insights into what is healthy and what breeds longevity, and it is community, and it is a priest in those days, or an older family friend that perhaps isn't directly in your family, or someone you can go to and talk to about the things that are weighing you down. And I think that even podcasts like this are so useful to just say, you can't afford to, ignore those things that are very difficult to get through. We're not supposed to get through this stuff alone.
Yeah.
We're born in communities and surrounded by people, and we should take complete advantage of that.
And it makes me think, that particularly for men, as you say, men perhaps not as accustomed to talking, not as accustomed to having those sort of friendships that women have, that I'm often quite jealous of. It's like, how come you've got these 4 friends you go and talk to all the time? Men need to cultivate that.
Yeah.
Men need to learn to cultivate that, and perhaps particularly in retirement. Those work contacts have gone, and you need to learn how to have those conversations that are intimate, that are real, and have that group of friends. You play golf with them, you play tennis with them. Doesn't matter what the initial contact is, but start to change the nature of the conversation at the bar afterwards.
But don't you think golf, the reason why it's taken off so much is two. One, you're competing with yourself, right? And that's the healthiest competition there is, as far as I'm concerned. I always say to my daughter, you're not competing against anyone else, you're competing against yourself. But also it allows for talking time between moments, and I think that's why particularly so many men are drawn to golf. Yeah,
that's right. But I think this is something, Charlotte, for men to probably deliberately consider. You might need to deliberately think about cultivating that group that's perhaps got a different kind of talk going on.
I think that's right, James, and I'm sort of hesitant to say it, but I almost sort of want to say, watch what the women around you do, and try and sort of go, okay, well, that's what they talk about, or those are the sorts of things, maybe I can do that too. I think as well there's sort of leaps and bounds being made in places and spaces like the men's shed is definitely a place where the capacity to be vulnerable and connect and really talk honestly is created. I think if you're going sort of for exercise in the morning, you can often see perhaps the the end point of the cycling gang. They're having their coffee and they're actually just standing there talking and chatting a little bit.
But stop talking about bikes, fellas. Come on.
Stop avoiding the road.
I won't argue with that. But I think it's trying to sort of take the opportunities where they might present, and then also thinking about what sorts of hobbies and things do I like doing. Maybe I've played golf once every couple of years, or if I had to, maybe I'll actually pick it up with some determination, or tennis, or cycling, or walking, or swimming.
Or in the case of the Greeks, because I spent a lot of time in Greece. I've got a house there, and all my family, apart from my mum and my brother, are in Greece. The men meet every day and have coffee. Yeah. Every day.
Do they talk? Do those old men sit there and talk?
They talk about everything.
Real stuff?
Real stuff. Yeah. Greeks are very, we like to think that our feelings live on the outside of our body. Right. We're very verbal.
If only you keep some in.
Yes, exactly. Do I really need to know that, every little detail? But you see them, and my house is around the corner from the oldest cafe in the area, and they gather there every morning, and they play backgammon, and they, and they chat about what's happening with their kids and their grandchildren and what they have to do that day, and then they meet up again, either later when it cools down again for the evening, but they're out. And I think one of the best things that you could do, and I say it to so many people when we're chatting about this, is, you've got to be careful of the conversations you're having inside your head, and you've got to be you've got to get outside of your head and into all of you, into a physical world, into a social world, because you can talk yourself into anything. There's no objectivity coming through that non-stop monologue that's happening internally. And it's good to be able to go somewhere, whether it's a doctor, whether it's a group of friends, start a new routine, have something to do that gets you up and out every day, to mix with others, to learn from their stories, to be able to express yours. These are all super healthy things.
Yeah.
So well said.
Mary and Charlotte, what a beautifully rich conversation that was. Thank you so much. Mary, thank you so much for your
pleasure.
openness through all of this. The fact
That's
that
my
you've been...
favourite thing to talk about is human beings.
Yeah, but the fact you've been able to write about, your suffering and express that so publicly, so well, that's so important too. And I thank you for it. It
Well,
allows
that was
us to
one
talk
level
about it
of
as well.
the therapeutic process is to be able to put it outside of yourself somewhere, whether it's in talking or in writing and then hopefully, I'm lucky that I'm in a public domain, so I can put it out there for others to respond to. And my whole career has been about dispelling taboos, and talking about the difficult things, and I wrap it in a capsule of comedy, and that's what makes people happy, and it was what makes me happy, and that's my antidepressant. It's a very joyful job, but I try to shove in as many issues in that capsule as I can to sort of liberate myself and everyone that's there too.
You do it beautifully and joyfully, and thank you
you
so much. Charlotte, thank you for sharing your expertise. Great to meet you.
You too. Thanks, James.
Dr Charlotte Keating runs her own private practice on the lower North Shore in Sydney, and Mary is about to embark on a national tour called Up Yourselfness. You've been listening to Series 5 of Life's Booming, Is This Normal? Another season will be coming along later this year, so stay tuned wherever you get your podcasts. I'm James Valentine. Thanks for listening.